The 19th, the year 2000.
Well, I was asked to talk about Clayton, and it is a good subject, but you could talk forever and not finish. I moved to Clayton when I was 5 years old. The year was 1928. Clayton was a very small town. In fact, we called it a village coming from Durham, which we thought was a city. The main street was paved, and no other street in Clayton was paved. And I remember my mother fussing all the time about the dust coming in the windows in the summertime because we didn't have air conditioning. I'd like to take you down on a stroll down Main Street when I was about 6 or 7 years old. When you started uptown, you passed a hardware store, a grocery store, and then you came to an unusual grocery store. Mr. Foster Barnes had a wonderful grocery store for children to go to. He sold all kinds of candy, and he had chocolate candies that you bite in a piece, and if you got a pink center, you got an extra piece of candy free. And we just ate ourselves to death with our pennies trying to get that free candy. There was Chick Shadan's place across the street there, and Chick sold the most wonderful hot dogs in the world. And believe it or not, they were 10 cents apiece. As you went on up the street, you passed the drugstore. Bedingfield's drugstore has been there ever since I can remember. And then on down the street, you came to Gully's department store. And, of course, we had already passed Barbara's department store and then Carroll's department store. Mr. Charlie Carroll was a character within himself. He was always on the street patting everybody on the back, hoping they would go in his store. And Gully's store sold ready-to-wear, but at the front of the store on the men's department side, they had a table, and on that table there was notebook paper, Blue Horse notebook paper. 50 sheets for 5 cents, and you actually got a good pencil with it free. Every Monday morning of my life, I bought a pack of notebook paper at Gully's store. And, of course, they sold Paul Parrott shoes, which all children had to have, and they weren't but about $3, a pair. But Miss Gully came to substitute in my class one day when my teacher was sick when I was in the 7th grade. And one child stood up with a radiator and wouldn't sit down. And she says, "Why don't you sit down?" He says, "I can't, Miss Gully." Says, "I'm trying to dry my feet." Says, "My socks are wet." Says, "My shoes have holes in the bottom of them." She said, "Let me see." And she looked in his shoes, and she said, if you'd buy your shoes at a good store, you wouldn't be in that shape. He said, "My daddy got them at Gully's store." And even as a child, we thought that was very humorous. But then on the other,
Miss Gully was
Mrs. Otha Gully. Then on the other side of the street, of course, were stores, a few stores. And at one time during my childhood, my father opened a restaurant on the other side of the street, and he called it Alite's Ice Cream Bar. And I was so proud to have my name on that restaurant. And he stayed there and would have been there right now if he had behaved himself, but he ran away, so that was the end of that. The Bedingfield brothers had a wonderful drugstore, and Mr. D.C. Poole had a drugstore on Main Street, and both of them were wonderful, but Mr. Poole had a soda fountain that wouldn't stop. And we all tried together there and got a Coke with vanilla in it, or cherry, or pineapple crush, or a cherry crush, things that kids today don't even have any idea what they are. But they were interesting places. On up the street, Mr. Scott Smith owned a grocery store, and then next to that was Atkinson's grocery, Roy and Horace Atkinson's father. And they made their living on the few children that went to school in Clayton at that grocery store, because back then it was penny candy. And we did buy candy from Mr. Atkinson. And we all got in trouble with it because we'd take it to school and try to eat it in school. But anyway, we thoroughly enjoyed going to Atkinson's store.
a lot of them call it Atkinson.
Atkinson's, that's right. Now, the 30s, which was most of my young childhood, were good times and hard times because they were the Depression years. You see, the stock market crashed right after I was born. I don't think I had anything to do with it, but it crashed anyway. And by 32, we were having hard times, and they were called Hoover times. Men would reach in their pockets and pull out the lining and say they had Hoover pockets. I remember that statement many times. And, of course, there was the Hoover carts that went up and down Main Street, coming from the country and everywhere. People had taken the axle off of their cars, and they had put the wheels on them and put a body on it, so they had a Hoover cart, because they couldn't afford to buy gas to come to town. And so we had the Hoover carts. And I remember living on Main Street, the many, many wagons that came to town in the fall of the year with just loads of cotton going to the cotton gin here to have cotton ginned, and then you'd see them going back home late in the afternoon taking a bale of cotton. So people had very little. My family were better off than many. Oh, there were all sorts of things that I used to tell my students in school when I was teaching, and they had never heard of pea sausage. And I said, well, I don't expect you have. You're too good to eat pea sausage. But people ate it during the Depression, and Baltimore chicken, too. Well, that held that interest, you know. So I made pea sausage and cooked it and carried it so I could give each child in my class a piece of pea sausage. There's nothing in the world but dried black-eyed peas. Cooked real thick, let get cold, add a little flour, a little pepper, and a little cayenne pepper, like you have in sausage, and roll it out and make it in little cakes and fry it, and it tasted just like sausage. So people with high blood pressure might want to know that today. So we had pea sausage, and I remember going home with a few girls to visit after school, and when you went in their back door, nearly every back porch was screened in. You would see a bowl of paper laid out on the table, and on that table they were drying coffee grounds or tea leaves so that they could be used again. And I know at our house we had a furnace in the basement, and Granddaddy took the clinkers out. Oh, every morning when he got up, he shook them out, the ashes, and put them in a box out on the side of the street. And people would come by and pick it up and take the clinkers and take it home, because then they could put maybe 4 or 5 pieces of coal and those clinkers together, and the coal would get the clinkers hot, and it gave more heat for the houses because they couldn't afford anything better. So these were things that I remember. Instead of yard sales like we see now, where people are selling all the good things, you know, good clothes and everything, we had rummage sales, and I mean what people sold was rummage, because they didn't have much to sell. But the rummage brought in a little money. I used to take the money I made when I'd have one and take my brother and sister to the movies, which cost a dime a child to go. Prices were unbelievable. Hot dogs were 10 cents. Bread was 10 cents. You could get a 2-scoop ice cream cone for 5 cents. And this was wonderful. We thought everything was great, but now when we see prices, we understand that it wasn't. We were the luckiest people in the world, but we didn't have any money. Also, during the 30s, the merchants of Clayton decided that what they needed to do was to advertise more. Maybe they would get more business if they advertised. And up here on the playground lot, there used to be a little service station on the corner there, and that playground where the children played on Main Street. So they started showing free movies 2 nights a week up there on the back of that building, and it was a shingle side building. And so the movie was sort of, you know, like it was in shingles, like a cross jigsaw puzzle put together. But I can say I believe that 90% of the townspeople went to see those movies, because we had very little entertainment. And we'd go to these movies and get out of the cars and sit on the fenders. So this was the first drive-in that Clayton ever had, I can tell you that. And then along about the time I was 12 years old, which was still in the 30s, we had a Clayton fair. Oh, that was advertised. It was going to be the greatest thing in the world for us to have a Clayton fair. And it was to us at that time. And we had the fair several years here, and we had exhibits, and we had rides, and we had just a regular carnival. And then the carnival furnished free acts that you could see that you didn't have to pay for. And one of those free acts was a couple named Rita and Dunn, and they were Y walkers. And they set up a place out there across that ballpark, and they walked those wires. And we children who hadn't seen much of that kind of thing in our life, we thought it was marvelous. And then the other attraction was really a dear old man named Cy Stone. And he was Cy Stone and his talking mule. And that was a great act for us, you know, to see him do that. And I got to know Cy because he ate at Daddy's restaurant, and he got acquainted with my grandfather, and he would visit us, and he came back to see us many times after the fair. Mr. Roberts, who was head of the fair, who came in and got the thing together, he and his wife were here during the fair, and they loved Clayton. They loved Clayton people. And so 2 or 3 years later, Mrs. Roberts died, and he brought her back here and buried her in Maplewood Cemetery. So she is buried here. Well, I guess that's a little reminiscing of what went on in my early days. I could tell you so many things. When we first moved here, they were building our houses. We moved in the Ransom Penny House, which some people call the Ransom Penny Mansion, on the street, Smith Street, that went to the cemetery. It was a great big rambling 2-story house, fireplace in every room, all the woodwork mahogany, beautiful place. Well, we lived there from the fall of 27 until the spring of 28. And everybody said, you know you're not going to live in that house. That's what I had been told by my family. And they didn't know anything was wrong with the house because we had my family and my aunt and uncle living there too. We were building 2 houses up on Main Street. And we didn't think anything about it, and come to find out that everybody said the house was haunted and that nobody would stay there. Well, my family found out pretty quickly that there were strange things going on there, but nobody ever believed in the ghost, but we had some rather scary moments down there. They remodeled the house while I was in college, and somebody moved there and lived a short while and left, and then it just burned down one night when it was empty, but it was a beautiful old home in Clayton.
Is that where the Allsbrooks, but not the ones we know here now? But was that a family of Allsbrooks that lived there?
No, the Murkisons lived there.
Okay.
Alfred Murkison's family. But it burned. Mother called me one night and told me, said, it just burned down. They didn't know why. It just got burned down. Well, they were the good old days as I grew up. Kids had nothing to do in Clayton much. We made our own entertainment. And you know, I believe we were far more creative and far smarter than kids are today because they think they know everything now. But we had to make what we played with mostly, and we made up our own games, and we had car garages on the side lot of our house, and I gave shows out there. I guess that's where I got all this business with. And we gave shows. I'd get every kid in the neighborhood and teach them a skit or something to do, and we would put it on, had sheets for a curtain, charged 5 cents or a penny for people to come, and we made a little money that way. Honey, it was better than taking pennies off a dead man's eyes. And so that's what people used to do. They said during the Depression, people stole pennies off a dead man's eyes. You know, they used to put them on the eyes to keep them closed. And so I guess we did real well there. But I came to school here and started in the 1st grade. And this building, the primary elementary building here, was fairly new. It had just been opened a year or 2. And I thought I was the luckiest child in the world to be going to school. And if anybody ever hears this, I want them to know that they should, and I do, appreciate every teacher that I ever had. I've thought about so many times the things that I couldn't do today if somebody hadn't taught me how. And teachers are wonderful people. Not because I was one, but they'll all go to heaven because they've already been through everything else, I can tell you that. But anyway, they're wonderful people. And this lady sitting across from me here, I'm going to say something about her in a few minutes. She doesn't know that, but she's getting worried about it already. Well, I came to school here.
Who was your 1st grade teacher? Was it
Miss Williamson. No, Miss Williamson from Micro. She was redheaded, like me. And she was the sweetest lady. And Miss Janie was teaching and Miss Lita Allen, but I didn't get them. I got Miss Williamson. And I loved her dearly. I remember all my teachers, Miss Spargo, Miss Mary Line Burr, and Carrie Allen, Carrie Nelson she was, and right on up. But I had some wonderful teachers. I had to because I got in college and without having to take, extra courses. And it was a small town, and I was lucky to do that. Well, anyway, I graduated in 1940. And my high school days were marvelous. But we still had the two buildings, elementary school and the high school. Mr. Welch was the principal when I was in high school. And we had maybe 110 or 15 students in high school. And when I was there, we had 5 teachers. That was all. And that included Mr. Norvell Bryant with the chorus and Mr. Welch teaching general business. So you know how small it was. 26 of us made it to graduation. I think about children now, they've had so much discussion on whether children should be passed up or tested, and they don't. Well, we had something worse than that. The 7th grade was the last grade of grammar school. And when you got in 7th grade, you knew all that year that you had to ride that bus to Smithfield and take a standard test, and if you didn't pass that test, you forget it. You didn't go to high school. We lost about 10 or 11 in our class. Well, they didn't drop out. They came back the next year and graduated from high school, but we lost a lot of our class. I don't know why they failed, but they did. Excuse me. But anyway, you had to go down there and you had to pass that test, and everybody was scared to death, but it wasn't so bad. It was interesting to be in school here, and since the junior-senior prom was just not long ago, and I had a niece that was attending the junior-senior, I've got to mention the junior-senior prom. I heard about it, and that they were all going in limousines to Raleigh, to a hotel, and have a big prom and dance, and going out to eat at all these fancy places and everything. You wouldn't believe ours. When I was in the 10th grade, when I was a junior, because we didn't have but 11 grades, and I was a junior, we gave the junior-senior for the seniors, of course. We had it in the high school hall. If you've ever been in that old high school building, there was that long hall. We had ham, sliced ham, string beans, candied yams, the same menu every year for the junior-senior. And it started at 6 o'clock, and it was over by 8. We had a speaker. You had to sit there and listen to some old man as bored as all get out speak, and you were back home at 8 o'clock because they didn't allow us to dance at school. We couldn't have any dances. My senior year, we did a little better. We moved over to the Women's Club, which was a better facility by far. But we had a little better junior-senior called the Last Roundup, and it was the last roundup. But we still had that one of those boring speakers, and that sort of thing. When we were down in grammar school, we went to chapel every day for 30 minutes. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. We went to chapel, and they'd have a speaker or a preacher or somebody try to get us to live right and do right, I guess. I don't know what else it was for. But anyway, graduation was a highlight of the school year. Now, commencement in Clayton was a big event of the year, and everybody went to commencement. And I thought about when I went to the one down this year, it was such a lovely commencement. Everybody did so well, the students and all did so well. But I thought about when I graduated in those years, people dressed up to go to commencement. They wore high-heel shoes and pretty clothes and gloves, and the men wore suits and tie. And down here I saw people dressed any way in the world, which is a casual look, which is a thing now. And you have to accept it as what it is. But graduation was a highlight of the year. We used to have class night where the seniors wrote out their program, and they gave their last will and testament and their prophecy and all of those things.
It used to last about a week, didn't it?
Yeah, a whole week. And, honey, people walked. People didn't have many cars even in 40, and you'd see them walking from all over town to that building of the auditorium to go to commencement. No matter, and it was usually in May because we didn't have but 8 months school, you see. And so then you had a baccalaureate sermon, which everybody attended. You had graduation night, which was beautiful. And I think the year I graduated was the first year that they had caps and gowns to wear, that the girls had to wear white dresses and the boys sport coats. And I remember my mother and aunt grew sweet peas by the carloads on a fence, and they made corsages for a lot of the girls to have flowers that couldn't afford to buy them to go to that. So it was a wonderful time. But I was going to tell you now, we had another part of commencement. We had recitation declamation contest. You remember that? And Miss William Bagley, who is sitting here listening to me, she was one of the children that participated in that. And you won, didn't you, Emily?
Yes.
You won the, you won, no, you won the
coach.
year you went there, and I was just so proud of it. When I graduated in 1940, we had 26 seniors. Now they have over 200 seniors a year, which more than doubles anything that we had even when I taught here and retired from teaching here in 1981. So that goes that far. But I wanted to mention that the school was the center of most of everything in the town. And everything was done through the school. And we had such a wonderful time. We really did. And I got through, and I went to college, and I felt like I didn't know anything, but I found out I knew pretty much. When I got there, I was pretty smart. I got along pretty good. I didn't flunk anything that first semester anyway. Back to the 30s for one more note. But after the free movies were in Clayton, we finally got a little theater down there next to Mr. John Irving Barnes's funeral home. And Mr. Howell in Smithfield opened a little theater here. There was one aisle in the middle, seats on each side. And if you sat down at the front, you had to lie down in the seat to look up at the screen. I guess that's why my neck is always hurt, because it cost a dime for a child to go to a movie. And you would look for dimes to go. Now, remember, times were hard. We had a cousin who was an elderly man, and he was kind of rich, we thought. And he would come and sit with the family about 1 or 2 nights a week, and I could not wait for him to leave, because change always fell out of his pocket. And I would go down in the couch and get those dimes. Boy, I was glad to get money to go to the movie. And we enjoyed that movie. Then later, of course, Mr. Knott opened the Clay Theater here, and it lasted until television came in. And Mr. Knott, I don't know, he got scared, I think, that it wouldn't, that the theater would be a thing of the past. But isn't it strange that in all those times we've had movies and now we don't have a movie theater? That's interesting to me.
Cut that thing off a minute.
During that time that all of this was taking place, as a child, as I said, we played at home. And we played games like hopscotch and jump rope and hide and seek and pretty girl station and all those things that you young people listen to this you wouldn't dream of. Also during the 30s, we began to make some improvements in Clayton. The WPA, which was the Works Progress Administration sponsored by the Roosevelt administration to help people get by with work until they could find good jobs again. They did curbs and gutters and that sort of thing in our town. They did fences around the cemeteries, and I guess they did it because people were just dying to get in, that would keep them out. But anyway, they put up fences, and they did things of this sort. And we began to get our streets paved, which was a marvelous thing. So we were improving. New industries came to Clayton. By 1948, Champion came. And that was a big thing for this town. Norwich, but came to be Champion. Thank you, Virginia. And they had a big open house, and everything was just great. And I was so lucky. I was teaching here that year, and it was right at commencement time. And Mr. O'Hara called me and asked me would I like to use the flowers that they had been sent from everybody in the world to decorate my stage. And honey, we had the most gorgeous commencement that you have ever seen in your life. Everybody thought I'd gone hog wild. Great big baskets and everything, just beautiful, expensive arrangements. But we already had 2 cotton mills, you know, the one barber mill and then the other one. But we were glad to see new industry come. And since that time, it seems like it just gradually picked up till it's gotten to where we now have traffic jams on Main Street in Clayton. That's another side of the story. In 1948, we had 6 high school teachers and 12 elementary school teachers. Now, Emily, you've been a teacher. Can you believe that? In 1967, there were 72 seniors and 21 teachers. Now, what it is today, there are over 200 seniors, and you just look at all the buildings that have been built, the annexes that have been made, and so on and so forth. So schools have been improved. When I was in high school, we had 3 buses that brought children to school. And now, if they come through town, used to before they moved the schools all out everywhere, but it was a line I don't know how long. But that was life as this community as I remember it in the far past. There were many other things that happened that would be interesting, I'm sure, but all of the things that are recorded, I didn't see any need to say anything about. But I do want to recall the log cabin station that was up here where this library is. It became a bus station during my early days. And the kids from school, if they had a nickel, they wanted to come out here and buy Coca-Cola. Well, at one time, Grace Aycock ran a beauty shop in the log cabin. And so some of the girls decided that we'd skip school from study hall one afternoon and come out to the log cabin and get us a Coca-Cola. Now, the building was a beautiful old building. It was a log cabin. But at the back doors, they just closed, and then they put a board across them on the outside to hold them to. It wasn't locked up any other way, I don't guess. But anyway, we felt we had never skipped school, and we felt if we skipped school and came in the front door of the beauty shop, that we could get us a Coca-Cola and sit there in the beauty shop and drink it. And then when we heard the bell ring for the next class, we'd go back to school. So that was our plan, and we were doing just fine. But Mr. Welch, somebody told him that the study hall girls were skipping school. And you know what he did? He came and sneaked up to the back of that log cabin and barred those doors. And when somebody said, "Here comes Mr. Welch around the front," we were all back there just beating ourselves to death trying to get out that door, and he had locked us in. And you know what punishment was then? And that was the only time I ever got in trouble in school. Had to sit in his office 5 afternoons after school until the street lights came on. Well, that could be 6 o'clock or 6:30 or 7 o'clock, depending on what time of year it was. But anyway, we sat there and we sat there. And so Mr. Willie Carroll was a light and water man in Clayton. And I saw Mr. Willie uptown one day, and I said, "Mr. Willie, how do you turn on those street lights around the school?" He said, "Well, we turned them on different poles back then." I said, "Well, could you for the next 2 or 3 days turn them on just a little bit early, like 4:30 or 5 o'clock?" And I told him what happened. He says, "I'll do anything for you." And bless Patty, the next afternoon, Mr. Welch was sitting up there at the desk just working, and we were sitting around on chairs in his office. And I looked, and the street lights came on. I said, "Mr. Welch, may we go?" He says, "Heavens no." He says, "It's a long time till the street lights come on." I said, "Mr. Welch, look, all the street lights on this block are burning." And we got to go home. Wasn't that wonderful?
How many girls were involved? 2
About
or 5?
about six. But we got in trouble for that. But that's the only trouble I really got into. Now, the highlight of my life in Clayton, and there's been a lot of highlights in my life in Clayton, but the highlight of my life was the centennial. It was the most wonderful time that I have ever known in Clayton. Everything here was different. You know, it's like the Christmas season, even now. When the Christmas season comes, everybody loves everybody, and everybody's cheerful, and everybody speaks to everybody, and everybody's happy. Well, the Centennial did that to Clayton. I've never seen the town so united, and I've never seen people work so hard and hope so much that it would be a success. And they worked to make it a success. We owe so much to Charles Barden, who was the head of the Centennial. And I'm sure his calendar was more full than mine, and mine was so full that I didn't have a night or day off from January until the end of May that I could do something that I wanted to do other than that. We applied for a charter, which we had to have to form a corporation, and we formed the Centennial Corporation. It was filed with Thad Ewell, Secretary of State, and far in advance of the coming of the Centennial in 1969, plans were being made for it. And as I say, Charles Barden was really the backbone of us all. There was a board of directors, and I was on that board. I was privileged to be on there, but by the time May ended, you didn't know whether you were privileged or whether you had been doomed to it because it was so hard work. But anyway, each member of the board was put in charge of a different phase of the Centennial. And I was put in charge of the drama down at the high school, First a Dream. And I worked like a dog, and I'm going to tell you just a little bit about that. In First a Dream, it was the title. They ran a contest for someone to give a name to the spectacle. And Keith Ferrell chose that name and won it, First a Dream. And he had written with that a little paper with it that you can find if you get an old Centennial book in the library and read his introduction. The Centennial Committee hired the John B. Rogers Company to put on the Centennial Force. Now, that doesn't mean they did it all, but they were here to guide us in it. And it was produced by Mr. George Elias, who came with them, who brought the group in. And they were going to use the high school field, football field, or stadium as we call it now, was to be presented there for 6 nights. But we didn't make it but 5 nights because it rained the opening night and we couldn't show.
Broke up a drought, didn't it?
Beg your pardon?
Broke up a drought.
Yeah, broke up a drought, so we were glad to get the rain. And the theme of the Centennial, of course, was carried through with the outline of Clayton's history, but they had that thing down pat that they could just fill in any town and make it work. I changed a lot of things that wasn't working for me. But the Centennial was fantastic. And we organized the people of this town in groups so that they would have a group that could get together and have a party, get to know each other, and dress up in their Centennial clothes. And we had the Brothers of the Brush, and the Bells. And the Bells, of course, were, well, the thing that was so great, it involved everybody. They had groups for little tiny children to be in, and a lot of those children are long grown now and so forth, but they all had such a good time. And up on the lawn at the Gower House, which was the Centennial headquarters, it was named Centennial Headquarters. They had horseshoes and croquet and all the things like they had years ago. There's so many things I want to tell you that I'm going to try to cut down a little bit because I'm not going to run this thing over an hour. There were 20 to 25 people in each group, and they had groups. Today, some of the groups still are together and have meetings every 2 or 3 months. Did you know that they're still meeting?
Our Brothers of the Bush group does.
Yeah.
I don't believe that Isabel's. I have not heard
I don't know about that.
Isabel's.
We had several parades during the time coming of the Centennial before we showed the spectacle and had that week. And one of those, they had a funeral up there on the Gower House lawn for the buried the bush, the razor. And they had a parade, and they brought the casket and all down Main Street, and all the men in this town were so ugly to me, pardon me for saying so. They had all kinds of beards. I've never seen such a dirty-looking bunch of folks in my life. But they would dress up in their top hats and their bow ties and they looked good, but out of class. One woman said if her husband didn't hurry and shave, she was going to leave him. So I guess they felt that way. Some of them did. But it was so much fun. If you were a man, you could pay not to have a beard. Or if you didn't pay and you didn't grow a beard and you lived in Clayton, you could be put in jail and fined for that. So they were some of the things that we did. The Centennial Company brought in costumes that people could buy, and many people made their own. Some of them, I know in one parade I wore a dress that was Miss Rose Duncan's, Ross Duncan's mother's, and I wore her dress in the parade. And gosh, she had been dead so long. But anyway, it was a beautiful old dress, and I wore it in the parade. Was proud to do so. And it was just fun. Everything that people did was fun. The spectacle was out of this world. It had over 250 people in the cast, not counting all the people that worked behind the scenes. And we had a long trailer behind the scenes full of properties that had to be in and out for each sequence of that program. And if you don't think those people worked back there. But one of the biggest problems we had when Mr. Elias came, he says, now, Miss Avery, you're going to have to get some mules and some horses. I said, where in the Sam Hill do you think I'm going to get any mules? A mule's been out of this country. So he says, well, we've just got to have some mules. And said, we'd like to have a stagecoach. Well, Saturday was the only day I had free, and I would take a crowd of my students and ride this country over. Went all down to Spring Hope and everywhere, trying to find somebody that we could rent some horses and mules from. Well, we finally found a man out here at Archer's Lodge that had some riding horses. So he and his children were going to be in the thing, and so that was good. I got the horses. But then they had to leave them over here. They said they couldn't bring them back and forth because they were busy on the farm. I said, well, let me see if I can find a place to house them over here. And there was an old mule stable, old horse stable down there on Main Street, not right across from where Ed Hardy used to have a service station, where the Gulf station was. And Uncle Troy, Mr. Troy Page, owned it. And so I went to see him. I said, can I put some horses down here? And he says, well, who's going to look after them, Alite? And I said, I guess I will. So, honey, at 5:30 every morning, I was up. I had hay delivered up there. I'd go up there and feed the horses, water them, and go back and feed them again late in the afternoon for them to come get them to ride in the pageant. Then there was a man out at near Archer's Lodge. I can't recall his name. He had 2 mules. He said, well, you can have my mules, but said, they'll have to be home before dark. I wanted them for the parade. He said, but you'll have to get them back before sunset, says, because I don't have any way to transport them. Says, you'll have to get them back. So we had the parade. We had built a stagecoach because we couldn't find one. My students actually built a stagecoach. You've seen pictures of it in the papers and all. And we had those mules hitched up to that stagecoach and went down Main Street. Well, by the time the parade was over, it was about 6 or 6:30. And those mules had to be in Archer's Lodge before dark. I didn't have a truck to take them home or anything. And me and a student of mine walked those mules to Archer's Lodge. Now, if you don't believe me, and I had on high heel shoes, I'll never forget that. I know that's not important, but it's funny. But we did these things. We did lots of things during that time. Let me see if there's something else I want to tell you. I know that the people of this town were the most cooperative of any people I have ever seen during that time. Clayton has always been a wonderful town, and it's a friendly town, and I hope it never loses that atmosphere of we like you, you like us, but it's got to change from what it is right now. When we started having traffic jams in Clayton, as Cooper Starlins, a friend of mine, said, he says, Alite, can you believe that there's a traffic jam on Main Street in Clayton? Used to, we joked about it and said when anybody asked us where we were from, we would say, I'd say, I'm from Clayton. I said, where is that? I said, well, you don't see much, but you hear enough to make up for it. So that was the old saying. Now we don't even know people, and it's our fault and their fault, too, that we are not as much united as we should be today. And everybody who comes into this town should, if they're going to make this their home, they should make it their business to know the town and to appreciate the town and all that's done here. Because when I go back to when I was young, this town has come a long way. A lot of improvements have been made. People are working hard to keep it good, but there's not the unification of the town there used to be. And that's what happens when a town grows so much. But let's hope that it will come back. And I hope if anybody's listening to this, they will help to make that come true. There is an old song, nothing could be finer than to be in Carolina in the morning. But I think that something should be added to that. Nothing could be finer than to be in Clayton, North Carolina, every morning. Thanks for the memories, Alite. Is that okay?